trying to make heaven my home. Sometimes I'm tossing, I'm feeling low. Oh, and sometimes I just don't know which way to turn. Oh, I heard of a city called heaven, and I'm trying to make heaven my home. Sometimes I'm tossing and I'm driven so low. Oh, and sometimes I just don't know which way to turn. Oh, I heard of a city called heaven, and I'm trying to make it my home. Ooh.
Today, a reading from the Gospel of Mark. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately a woman heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home and found the child playing on the bed, and the demon was gone. Here ends the reading of words that gives us insight on God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
So how many of you would consider yourselves to be rational people? Rational people, people who try to step back and try to make decisions rationally, try to look at things objectively. I've heard that people can be irrational at times. Never me, though. I'm never irrational. Just kidding. We're all irrational sometimes, right? No matter how hard we try to be rational, and even though we know that it would be better if we could really sit and think things through, sometimes it is hard. I've got a friend who I met through my doctoral program. His name's Ken Hood, and he has written a couple of books on irrationality and faith. And his argument goes that human beings would be better off if they could be a little more rational, but that we all have some biases in our lives that we don't know about. Sometimes they're unconscious biases. And those biases can make us act irrationally from time to time, right? That's just a part of the human condition. And he compares it to going and renting a car. You ever gone and rented a car? And a lot of times when you rent a car, it's not the same make and model and year that you drive. And so you've got to get used to it, right? And so you get in the car and you adjust the seat so that it's just right. You make sure that you can connect your phone to the car, because that's a necessity in this day and age. You make sure you know where the blinkers are, where the shifter is. But then before you start to drive, you have a recognition that no human being can see 360 degrees, right? And that when you drive, there are going to be people on the road besides yourself, because you're not going to be driving alone, probably. And there are going to be obstacles along the way. And that you're going to have blind spots in that car. And so you have to find the blind spots. And then you have to adjust the mirrors, right? So that you can see in those blind spots. And he said faith, when it's at its best, is about helping us search for our blind spots within ourselves and then adjusting the mirrors to help see in those blind spots. We all have blind spots. That is part of what it means to be human. Having those blind spots isn't in and of itself wrong or sinful. What makes it wrong is whenever we refuse to look at those blind spots. Whenever those blind spots cause us to behave in ways that are harmful to others. And so we have to do the work of looking for those blind spots and trying to find a way to see in them. I think that's important on this MLK weekend as we talk about how it is that we individually, perhaps, and as a country, have blind spots. And I think it's also important when we're thinking about Scripture. I love the Scripture reading we just heard. In it, Jesus is tired. He's exhausted. He's been going around and he's been preaching, he's been teaching, he's been healing, and he is ready for a break. And I like this. Jesus is practicing some self-care. He's setting some boundaries. He said, I'm feeling it. I need a break. And so he goes to this house, and the Scripture tells us that he wants to be left alone. He's had it with these people, and he's ready. He needs to recharge. But just as he's settling in, this woman finds him. And she wants him to do something for her. The text that we heard this morning says she's a Syrophoenician woman. The Gospel of Matthew calls her a Canaanite woman, but either way, she's a Gentile. So she's an outsider, she's a foreigner. And Jesus is just ready to relax. And here she comes and she won't leave him alone. She wants something from him. And she starts to beg him to help her. Jesus, could you please heal my daughter? Now, she's probably tried everything that she can think of, right? She loves her daughter. She's probably tried everything she can do at home. She's probably gone and tried to see the specialists, right? The healers of her day. And nothing is working. And so she has this last thread of hope to which she is desperately hanging on. Could Jesus help her daughter? And here she goes, begging Jesus to help. And of course, Jesus responds in the way we would expect, right? Or does he? Here Jesus says, "Woman, I'm tired. Leave me alone." He said, why should I help you? The teaching is for the children, not the dogs. right? The food, the spiritual food, it's for the children, not the dogs. He is saying that he is teaching his own people. That's who his message is for, his people, not her people. How dare she come and ask him for help? Now, theologians have had some problems with this, and they've tried to do a lot of mental gymnastics to make this not sound so bad. Like, yeah, Jesus called this woman a dog, but didn't everybody love dogs? You know, dogs are great. It's not so bad, you know? Or they'll say, you know, Jesus actually, you know, he used the diminutive form of dog. He called her a puppy. And aren't puppies so cute? It's not so bad. These are actual theological arguments that theologians have come up with. I am not making this up. Jesus called the woman a dog. It was an insult. It was an insult in his day, too. Even more so. People didn't pamper their dogs the way we do today. Dogs were often wild, and they often carried disease. It wasn't a compliment to be calling somebody a dog. You know, we think that xenophobia is bad in our day, and it is, you know, the way we vilify people from being from elsewhere. But Jesus was also a part of a society that had been conquered and had this sense of identity where it was really important to know who you were and who you're from, where you're from. You know, whenever you're conquered, whenever you've had violence forced upon you, culture becomes important, especially when it's been robbed, whenever it's been taken away. Then you have to double down. And you know, in ancient society in particular, I think it was a way of surviving. That's part of human evolution, you know. It was a way of surviving, to look at the people who were similar to you, to find camaraderie there. It was an evolutionary necessity to try and ensure that you were surrounded by people who were similar to you. And yet, Jesus' whole ministry was about breaking down those kind of barriers. And in this moment, even Jesus messes up. That bothers a lot of people. That bothers a lot of theologians, which is what the mental gymnastics is all about. But look, every single Christian tradition, even the Christian traditions that have a very high Christology, that means even the traditions that really think Jesus is divine, every Christian tradition believes that Jesus is fully human. You know, he ate, he drank, he slept, all of those things. And if Jesus is fully human, then I think it also means that sometimes, even Jesus messed up. That sometimes even Jesus had a blind spot because of where he had grown up, where he had lived, and who he was. Even Jesus! Even Jesus. And I don't know about you, but I find that kind of comforting. Because, I mean, I mess up all the time. And if even Jesus messed up sometimes, that's kind of hopeful to me. And so, this woman has just been called a dog by the last thread of hope that she has for her daughter. She didn't walk away. She didn't give up. She said, "Do not even the dogs deserve the scraps from the table? Don't I deserve something, Jesus? Am I not human to Jesus? Don't I deserve a little bit of grace and compassion?" And in that moment, Jesus realizes what has happened. He had a blind spot, and he readjusts his mirrors. And he says, "You're right. Go, and your daughter will be made well." Whew. I love that story. I really love that story because it shows that Jesus is human, and it shows us what to do when we mess up, because we're going to. It shows us that when we have a blind spot and it is brought to our attention, instead of just pretending like it isn't there, we adjust our mirrors and we try to compensate. We try to see in that place where we couldn't see before. I really love weird scripture. I love it. My favorite scriptures are not the same as most other people's favorite scriptures, and I like them because I think that the human condition is odd. It's weird. And those weird scriptures give us unique insight into who we are as human beings and who God calls us to be. This weekend is MLK weekend. And a lot of, I think, white America in particular, likes to use this weekend for self-congratulations. Like, look at how far we have come. And in some ways it is true as a society. In some ways we have come quite a ways. But in a lot of other ways we really haven't. I think a lot of white America likes to use MLK Day to talk about how America has overcome racism. Which isn't true, right? I mean, we've seen that, and I think we're increasingly aware of that, especially in white America. I think we're especially aware of that after the Trump presidency and after we saw all of this racism come out from under the rug, where it had not disappeared but had just been swept under. We saw a rise in hate groups. We saw a rise in people being vocally racist in society. But I think that still, there is a narrative where we don't really understand what Martin Luther King Jr.'s life was really about. His ministry didn't stop with the March on Washington, with the I Have a Dream speech, and with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. I think that as Martin Luther King Jr. continued on throughout the course of the 60s, he stopped talking about race as a separate issue, but began to realize that race was tied into everything. So I learned a new term last weekend from Larry Morris, our Timothy of our congregation, as we were talking at our progressivechristianity.org board meeting about how we were going to approach topics in 2024, and he said, we should approach all of these topics through a racialized lens. That we should be looking at topics not with racism separate from that, but we should think about race as a lens through which we see all of these topics. And I think that actually what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing in the last 4 or 5 years of his life was looking at society through a racialized lens. He recognized that racism was tied into the healthcare system, that racism was tied into the economy, that racism was tied into the war machine, that racism was tied into all of these different aspects. And so he started talking about that, and whoo, did people get uncomfortable? Because he started to talk about a guaranteed annual wage for people. He started to talk about universal health care. He started to talk about stopping the U.S. war machine and the ways that we were acting racist, not just in the United States, but in our foreign policy. And he recognized that if we were really going to be Jesus followers, we couldn't just make it legal for black people and other people of color to have access to basic things in society, but we needed to actually reframe the way we were doing things as a society in general, because they were all a part of this larger systemic racist system. And I think a more authentic way to honor Dr. King, rather than just quoting from the I Have a Dream speech, is to follow in that legacy of looking at society through that racialized lens to say, how are our systems continuing to perpetuate this racist ideology that puts people of color at a disadvantage. And I think that whenever we ask those questions and we strive to make the changes in our society that we desperately need to make, then we are living into the legacy of Dr. King. I find his life so inspiring because he was a dynamic person. He was a person who changed. He allowed his experience to change. As I mentioned at communion, he became a pacifist and an advocate for nonviolent resistance through his own experience. And it's not where he started out. It was through his encounters of seeing the compassion of Jesus that he was able to put that practice into place to try and change the system. You know, we all have blind spots. It's part of being human. But I think a part of being a Jesus follower is a constant call to readjust our mirrors. A constant call to not make decisions out of the irrationality of bias, but to adjust our mirrors and to see those places where we have had blind spots so that we can not hit those obstacles in the future, so that we can better care for the fellow people on the road of life. And so, friends, I think that that is something that I am inspired to do this MLK Day, to create what Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community, a place where everyone is treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And to me, that sounds a lot like what Jesus called us to do too, to create a just world where we are working on not only to address our own biases, but the biases that are in the system so that they can be eliminated and we can live in a more just world. Friends, may we be called this MLK Day to create a world just like that. May it be so, and thanks be to God.